That was fun.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Learning Hours, the first learning hours of 2024. Or, or in other words, Microsoft's fiscal year 25. I'm Jimmy Vaughan. We've got Matt Slomka. We've got Michel Bouman. Thank you, everybody, for coming on and spending some time with us. We want to actually go over something that was a big request from us after we did the boot camp, after we did a whole bunch of things. It is Microsoft Teams layouts. We've got a whole bunch of new documentation for you, so we're going to go through. But why don't we go ahead to the next slide, Michelle, and go ahead and what's that?
Jimmy, this is the most extensive deck I've ever seen on layout. So you're all in for a treat, most definitely.
Yes. But here's the rules of the road. We're going to ask everybody to use the chat. If you've got questions, go ahead and use the chat. Ask the question. Matt and I, Michelle, will all be monitoring the chat. If we see something come up, we'll address it while we're talking about it. But the agenda for today is going to be layouts. Again, defining what we're going to be discussing. What is a layout? The touchscreen console, changing your view. We're going to review every single layout that's possible. And we're going to answer your questions, but we're going to give you details about what's inside of that layout and how it goes through. We're also going to talk about archetypes and go out over the furniture and how layouts will help you be more comfortable inside of a room if you choose the right layout. And again, settings. We're going to go over the settings so you can decide which are the default layouts that you want to do inside of these rooms. How do you want people to actually walk into the room? Michelle and Matt, you guys know we always go into places and we say, hey, people will generally hit the button, start join, and then that's as much as they touch the console. So for that, we want to make sure that they're getting the proper installation and everything else. Now, everything here is the best that we can do. This information is presented by myself, Matt, and Michelle. It's targeted towards Microsoft partners and delivered outside here in an open forum. So if you're a customer, if you're anybody else outside of a partner, please go ahead and join us. We're happy to be here. Any reference to specific things does not endorse anything or constitute anything from Microsoft itself. And this is the information that we have as of September 2024. That's important to note because layouts change and layouts do change over time. I'm not saying anything. November's an important time frame for everybody.
No roadmap, Jimmy.
And I'm not giving you any roadmap, but it is important to note. So with that going with that, why don't we jump to the next slide? And why don't we start this? Matt, what is a layout?
So a layout is what goes on your front of room displays. So that's what end users see when they're sitting in the conference room. It has nothing to do with what's on the console. It is the experience that's shown on the front of room screens.
That's important to understand because the front of room screens is really what we're going to concentrate on. And Michelle, if you go to the next slide, we want to help everybody define what we're talking about. When you are talking about this image, this is a console image. Now, this shows up in different places. 9 times out of 10, Matt, when we're talking about Teams rooms, it actually shows up on the tabletop. But in boards and different layouts, you may see things that this actually starts at the front of the room, and then you go into the meeting and you hit this. Now, this gives you a whole bunch of opportunities from that console view. This is meant to be an easy to start that meeting, Matt, whether it's join by hitting the join button, whether it's the QR code, or it's meet now or calling. And Matt, even we had this during open hours. Meet now and call are actually 2 different ways of making
different
calls
behaviors.
Too. Correct. In one, you get DTMF tones. In the other, you're actually joining the MCU and going ahead, and DTMF tones will not pass. Now, in either one, you're not going to hear those DTMF tones because they're actually paused there. But understanding what the difference may be is actually important. But this is about layouts. And like I said, we want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. So the console is where we go. Now, when you go to that console and you change the view of your meeting, this is where we're going to talk about the layouts, Matt.
Yes. Yeah. And this is where we've got all of the different layouts here. And this, Jimmy actually stole the screenshot directly from our public documentation too, that defines each of these different layouts. So you can kind of walk through and see what's available, what's there, what is it, how does the system join by default, what's available as toggles for folks to change. And we're going to walk through what each of these look like and how they behave and what the user experiences are of these. But at a high level, that layout picker on the console is there and available for folks to be able to change what that front of room experience looks like. on their screens. And yes, I was going to make fun of Jimmy Choo too for saying MCU, but
But Matt, it's funny because as we were putting this together, as you and I were talking about things, and Michelle and all of us were sort of going back and forth and creating this deck, it was funny because what we didn't realize was, okay, this is grayed out. Why is this grayed out? We had to find answers about all of these different things, which brought up some of the conversations that we had on LinkedIn, which brought us to, hey, we need a document to do this, which is why this was created.
Yes, for sure, for sure. Let's jump into the first piece. So we've broken this down into both Windows and Android. Jimmy, let's start with Windows and start with what we've been yelling about as it is just a layout, front row.
Front row. Front row is probably the most well-known layout that we have. And again, it is the layout. Remember when we were teaching, and you guys remember this way back when, years ago, we had to define and tell people front row is the layout at the front of the room, while the signature room encompassed everything around that. And helping to define that is really what we want to do for partners, for customers, for all of us, so that when we raise support tickets, when we're talking to each other at trade shows, when we're helping to define this, all of the things that we do that are new, we had the same terminology. And front row is something, like I said, it's a great layout. Matt, it's not meant for every single room.
No, it's not necessarily meant for every single room, especially rooms where the camera placement and stuff doesn't really make sense for front row. Front row is all about that eye contact and making sure that everybody's looking towards the folks that are remote and drawing that eye contact and making an inclusive meeting experience. And there's rooms where it just doesn't make sense in those spaces, or in a space where you're looking for really large format content. If you've got a smaller display in a space and you're sitting really far away, front row may not make sense because the content's just going to be slightly smaller than it otherwise would be. And so there's scenarios where it doesn't make sense. We're trying to do the best we can to make front row as easy as possible and as usable as possible in every space. You've seen it evolve over time. You know, you take like the single screen 16:9 layout, for instance, and originally we had the left and right panes on by default, which made the content small. We took feedback from customers and we got rid of the left pane by default, making the content region bigger. Similar scenario on the dual screen 16:9 setup, where originally we had nothing in that right pane unless someone manually pinned or spotlit, and now we automatically add people into that spot with active speaker. That way we're using that extra space that's on the screen. So front rows continue to evolve over time to make it more usable in more spaces as well, not just in specifically designed signature spaces.
And I see a couple questions that came in the chat. Is front row heavily utilized? Front row is heavily utilized, but the single most impactful room that we've seen this in is that boardroom, is that one space that everybody wants to go to. And to be honest with you, at many of the trade shows that all of us sort of attend, it is what people are showing as their solution inside of Teams rooms. Now, why is that? Because the furniture, the lighting, the audio, the video, everything sort of works together and gives you this comfort level when you're inside of a room that presents this. Matt, you and I know that, you know, if you look at those single screen and dual screen side, they're actually doing that background replacement. Why is that? Because if we all have different backgrounds, like you see myself, Michelle, and Matt have different backgrounds here, it's actually jarring to you to actually see this. So having that background replacement with black, giving that one image, appears like you're sitting across the screen. Now, there's also something else to remember about front row. You'll see that there's a single screen 16:9, but there is no a single screen 21:9. There is no dual screen 21:9. That's because it doesn't currently support it. And that's another question that's inside of the chat right now that I think is important to discuss. Will we ever get third display support? Never say never, but we don't talk about roadmap and open things and everything else. But right now, I have not seen the need for a third display. And we're going to go into this in a couple of the other display categories, because we do get the question, Matt, how do I show display on two screens? Or how do I show people on two screens? Well, you can multiply these displays if you want to. But another thing with front row is that chart that you have down at the bottom. And we get asked this a lot. You know, one of the reasons why we did the design class that we did at the boot camp was because 90% of the questions that all three of us get are design questions, and we wanted to address all that. But this is actually a chart that came up, again, from a question from a partner that we had asking, how many people are actually shown on these?
Yeah, and I think the how many people question is what everybody wants to know, because they want to know how many people can I see? I'm building this immersive space. I'm building this great hybrid meeting room. How many people are going to be on the screen at once? And then we shipped a couple of releases ago now the option to actually control the size of the video participants on the screen also. So if you've got a really big display and you want the participants to be smaller and you want the content bigger, or the other way around, you can actually adjust that in the XML settings. And I don't think we actually told anybody we shipped that. It might be in the release notes, but the adjustment of the video participant size changes how many people fit on the screen. So medium is the default. So on a single screen room, you get 5 participants. On a single screen 21:9 room, you get 7 participants. Dual screen, you get 11 participants. But then if you make the participant size small, you fit more people. If you make the participant size bigger, you fit less people. And this chart explains very clearly how many people fit, or you can replace this with a meeting room instead. If it's not an individual person on their desktop, it's the same number of videos. It's purely just how they fit across the physical screen real estate. But we've done as good of a job as we can to cram as many people in as we can onto the screens without making them look like they're stepped right on top of each other. But this explains that out very clearly. That way everybody knows.
Yeah, and we've got almost 300 of our best friends here today and everything else. And more chat is coming in that I sort of want to address. One attendee actually asked, would be nice to get telemetry behaviors on meeting join and how many meetings are initiated by hitting the join, proximity, and everything else. We know, and while I can't give you the exact telemetry and everything else, Matt, we know that a large majority of meetings include hitting that join button and the participants are done with the console. Yes. We know that there's very little interaction that sort of happens. That's why we're going to go in and we're going to talk to a little bit about setting up, because what you want is the best layout for that room to always be there. And that's why we want to sort of touch on that, is because while I don't have the exact telemetry that we can give to you, we can't provide that information actually because of PII and things like that. But at the same point, we do know a large majority actually just hits that join. And if you guys remember back, we talked about the console. One of the main goals of Teams rooms was what? Removing the complexity of the meeting room itself. No more complicated dial strings, no more complicated join things. We want to hit that button and we want the technology to engage everywhere. And that technology is audio, video, front of room screens, everything. So if we go to the next layout, we'll actually talk a little bit more. And the next layout is the default layout that comes on Teams rooms on Windows, Matt.
Exactly. Yeah. So gallery is the default layout on every Teams Rooms on Windows device. It's been there from the Link days, Skype for Business days, Teams Rooms days. We, by default, show 9 participants on a single screen room and up to 18 participants on a dual screen room. The one cool thing about a dual screen room that's a little bit unique compared to, say, a legacy video conference of the past is if you've got 2 screens there, we'll actually spread the remote participants across both screens. So if you've got 2 participants in a dual screen room, you'll see one on the left screen and one on the right screen. And then as we populate, we add people to both screens at once, rather than, legacy VTC days, you had your people screen and your content screen. We make use of both screens in a meeting, even if there's no content in use. And you can see the beginnings of that in each of the spots on the side there. The other thing that I like to call out in gallery, because we've had customers notice this in the past, is we've gotten smarter with the gallery also. And for the first time, we have started intelligently hiding people from that gallery. And I just thought about this now, and we didn't write this in the slides, Jimmy, but I think it's worth talking about. If someone's in the meeting room and joins with their laptop and turns their camera on in their laptop, everybody thinks, oh, well, they're going to show up on the front of room screen. No, they won't, because we're going to use the proximity join logic to know that they're already in the room, and we're going to automatically hide the in-room participants' camera from the front of room screens. Because, no offense, Jimmy, I don't need to see you multiple times. If I see you physically sitting next to me, I don't need to see you on the screen also. And so I'm going to hide you there. And so we're going to do that.
It's uncomfortable to see yourself on the front of the screen too. So, but
yes.
But we do get the questions from people. I turned on my laptop. How come I don't see it? And that is something that's there. But there's something else that's actually missing from this gallery view: content. You don't choose gallery view when you have content actually sharing. That's an important thing to sort of understand. But another side of this too that we do inside of gallery view is understand that it's a meeting room. And with the meeting room, we expect more people to be there. So we actually give that meeting room space a little larger view on the canvas than we do individuals. And we do that for a reason, because like I said, we expect more people to be inside of that meeting room, giving a larger real estate inside of that view as well. And now we're going to get to the gallery plus content, which is another popular way that people actually default their systems if they've got content.
Exactly. So once you've got gallery set up, by default, you get gallery plus content as soon as someone shares content into that meeting. So from that scenario, you go from, oh, I've got just my participants on the screen. Someone throws content up. Now you see your participants plus the content merged together. The other thing that's worth calling out is we include chat by default on Teams Rooms on Windows as well. So you'll see your participants, your content, and your chat all on the screen at the same time in an easy to use format that everybody can understand. And there's no user interaction required for this. It just happens as someone shares content, it pops up on the screen, you're good to go. On a dual screen room, all of your participants will get forced to the other screen. So you'll have your content screen and your participants screen, and you'll see the last 9 active speakers on that screen. On a single screen device, we letterbox the content and then include the participants on the side.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note out that you can define that you want to see content only on a single screen as the default, allowing people to just see the content sort of if you know that, hey, they're going to share Excel spreadsheets inside of their room. They're going to share things that are challenging to see, and I want to give as much real estate inside of there. But again, this goes towards the layout. What am I doing? You know, we talked about it during the boot camp. How to decide between a projector and a screen and dual screen and single screen. We went into all of that, understanding that. Again, we're not talking about why you're choosing a single screen or a dual screen here. We're giving you the opportunity to see these layouts, expanding on what we did on the boot camp. If you have not seen those videos, they are a great reference. Go back to the partner learning path and make sure that you see everything. Now, if we go to the next view, we're actually going to have a little bit of a different view as well, which is large gallery view.
Yeah, Jimmy, before we go into that, can we take a couple of quick questions from the chat?
I'm trying. There's a lot in there.
Been trying to answer them as I see them.
I'm trying to answer some of the ones that might be one-offs, but I know you wanted to speak about spatial audio during the front row piece, and you kind of skipped over it. But there's a question saying, is the opportunity to change to front row and spatial audio going to be a feature in Pro Portal?
So you can set the defaults for front row in Pro Portal today. So if you want to change the default meeting join experience, you can do that today in the Pro Management Portal. The rest of the settings that aren't available today are a roadmap and backlog item at the moment.
Right, and there's some about disabling chat in bulk without XML and Intune. I know there's something on chat coming up later in the slides. At the same time, I want to say, why do you want to disable chat in bulk? Especially because you want those in the room to see the chat as well. But I don't think that option is there. And there's a lot of questions about roadmap. And before I have to tell everyone that we're not going to be speaking, or type to everyone that we're not going to be talking about roadmap, we don't inform Jimmy about anything about the roadmap because he might just tell people about it. So this session is not going to be a roadmap session. We will have a separate roadmap session for a smaller audience. If you are a customer joining this session today, please reach out to your account team. They'll be able to help you with some of the roadmap stuff. And that also goes for Service Hub questions. When we get in M365 apps to the Hub 3, we don't talk about that here today. With that, large gallery.
Yeah, what do they say? Loose link sink ships, and I'm a battleship master, right? But let's talk about large gallery because, Matt, this is one that you and I sort of had to look at and understand a little bit further because large gallery is something that in a lot of people's documentation that I saw from the partners, it was missing and it wasn't documented. And that's because they don't really have the ability like we do to sort of get these pictures and understand exactly what's here.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think the other piece for large gallery is it's not actually exposed unless there's more than 9 participants in a meeting. So if you're, an MVP going through and testing and you don't throw 9 test devices into a call or things like that, you won't see the option to toggle on large gallery. But large gallery is one of those things that we built during COVID and during the pandemic, focused on participants wanting to see more people on video at once. So what large gallery is actually bot-based video. So it is a single video stream coming back be it on Teams Desktop or Teams Rooms. It's the same feature set and functionality, but we will send the last 49 active speakers in a single video stream back to the endpoint. So it's one 16:9 video, which is why you see the pillar boxing on your 21:9 screen there in the layout example, but single video stream back to everybody. If the room was one of the last 49 active speakers, it will also be in that large gallery layout, just to call that out for everybody. Again, chat on by default in this scenario also, but an excellent option if you're looking to see more people on the screen at once. Large gallery gives you that capability.
Yeah, and it's important to note that dual screen 16:9, we get the question all the time, how do I actually show content on multiple screens? Well, you're going to DA that again here, and knowing which screen is actually your content view, you can go into the settings on Teams Rooms on Windows, which is what we're talking about, and you can swap that view. So that if you've got it on a different screen, it will stay with that screen, allowing you to actually duplicate that screen through an HDMI DA or anything that you want to do in the AV side. We don't necessarily test for that. We actually test with two screens. We make sure that it's up there, but we do get that question from partners about how you do that. So large gallery view is an important one. And our next mode is something that a lot of people understand on their PCs. Together mode, it was sort of one of the things that sort of highlighted a little bit during the NBA games and things like that, where we were putting people in stands, where we were doing those things. But that's available on your Teams Rooms as well. Now, I'm not saying that you need to do this so that you can dribble like Steph Curry, so you can do everything with the NBA side. But if you are inside of a large stadium side of view, it actually does work pretty well. And again, together mode removes that background, putting you in your own mode. So Matt, it really does work well. I haven't seen it in a lot of Teams Rooms, but it's there. It's one of the ways that we actually do that background replacement and things like that. So understanding that this mode is there for you as well can be beneficial if you've got the right room.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is a very similar scenario to the together mode, to the large gallery setup, where it's a single video stream again. So same experience from that perspective. You need to have more than 9 participants in a meeting for together mode to be available. But then it gives you that consistent experience, that consistent look and feel and background across everyone. We now offer toggles in the desktop app too to change the together mode layout for everyone. And also in a recent update, we added labels to everyone's names below who they are too, because originally in together mode there was no name label there for different participants. You just saw everybody's heads, similar to what you would expect in a conference room, but now we actually have their display name displayed next to them as well, so that you know who it is on the screen. Particularly useful in larger meetings where you actually want to know who all 49 people are that might be in that together mode layout. But there's some funky options for together mode also, and there's extensibility options to build whatever you want as an organization too. If you want your own custom together mode layout, you can do that and build that. We've had customers build virtual versions of their exec boardrooms in the past, so that their execs can all sit together in a virtual version of what is their physical boardroom, which is actually really neat when you see it.
When you see it, yeah. It's kind of cool. All right, our next one is actually something that I haven't seen, and it was brought up because it was missing from the slide deck. It's actually focus on content. Now, this is exactly what it says. If you are, focusing on content, it's going to show the content. Sort of self-explanatory, but the layout is only available when content is shared, and that could be why it wasn't in the original slide deck, Matt.
Yeah, I think that's probably why nobody noticed, is somebody went and clicked the layout picker and there was no focus on content button, and they went, oh, okay, so there's only these layouts. And no, focus on content is a feature. It's available on Teams Rooms on Windows and Teams Rooms on Android, which we'll get to in a little bit. But it is purely a hide everything and just let me see the content experience on the screen. It is only available in single screen rooms, though. Doing it in a dual screen room isn't available because you've already got a full display of your content. So we haven't felt the need to put the focus on content capability there. So that's what this one is. Fairly self-explanatory, though, besides that.
Yeah, and again, this is not something that you can set as your default because it's only there when content is there, requiring people to actually understand when you want to do this, you'll go to the console and you'll actually choose this as a mode. So that is everything that's available on the Teams Rooms on Windows side. Now, Teams Rooms on Android has very, very similar layouts, but there's some slight differences that you may see inside of the Teams Rooms on Android side, and that's because They are programmed a little differently. As we attempt to get everything in line with each one, understanding which ones will sort of give you that image that you want is an important consideration while you're doing this. Now, not only that, many times what we say to people is the users have no idea what's in the background. It's really us as administrators that are making these kind of decisions. I want Android, I want Windows. Again, with the layouts, you will see very, very slight differences that a user will probably never see. Most of it is in the administration side, but front row is available on Teams Rooms on Android. I do believe it's not officially supported right now, Matt, but a lot of the OEMs do have it, but we don't have it on a wide basis. Is that correct? Or are we
No, front
100%
row's
out
totally supported, available, all good. Front row for single screen 16:9 and dual screen 16:9. We do not support a 21:9 aspect ratio yet for MTRA. So that is the one difference that you're going to notice as we go through these. And front row doesn't support spatial audio on Teams Rooms on Android, unlike what it does on Teams Rooms on Windows. So there's some slight variability there. But beyond that, from a capability perspective, front row is fully available on Android.
And Michel, if you go back to the front row slide, it's important to understand here too, with the Teams Rooms on Android side, you are setting the default inside of the settings itself. You're
Correct.
not doing an XML file. You're not doing things like that. So there is a difference in the way that you administrate this. Also, Matt, does your chart that we have on the Windows side, does that apply to the Teams Rooms on Android again, or is there no sliding scale that we have there?
So there's no sliding scale on Android, so there's no adjustability to the number of, or the video size yet on Android. So there's a fixed number of participants. You get 5 on a single screen 16:9, and it's 11 technically plus 2 because of the ability to spotlight participants on Android for a dual screen setup.
Yeah, and understanding that, again, front row might not be for every single room, but again, having that Teams Rooms on Windows and that Teams Rooms on Android experience, you will get the same from the user's perspective of I'm hitting this button, joining, and I'm inside of this meeting. So if we go to the next layout, we're going to actually talk about another default that's on Teams Rooms on Android, that is also on Teams Rooms on Windows, and you'll see they look very, very similar, and they're almost identical at this point. But the gallery view is available on Teams Rooms on Android the same way that it is on Teams Rooms on Windows, allowing you which one do I want to put inside of the room, maybe a small, medium, and large room, and we'll get to some of those design questions later. But again, this is an important one, Matt.
Yeah, I think the one unique thing to call out for Teams Rooms on Android is 9 participants on a single screen, only 15 participants today on dual screen. There is a item for that in the future to get that back to the same 18. The other unique thing for Teams Rooms on Android is it's the mixed grid setup. So if you have a participant that doesn't have their video on, they take up the same screen real estate as someone that would have their video on. It is a unique difference between Teams Rooms on Windows and Teams Rooms on Android. Teams Rooms on Windows, we prioritize video. Teams Rooms on Android, we see everybody on an equal playing field. There's been some conversation back and forth on what the correct option is, and we continue to adopt and adapt and change that over time.
Yeah, and I think I'm reading the chat that's actually going through on front row. I think my not supported was actually on 21:9 for Android front row side. I think that's where my confusion was. Some of the OEMs are out there saying that they have it, but again, from Microsoft side, it is 16:9. All right, so if we go to the next layout, Michelle, we'll go ahead and we'll look, and Teams Rooms on Android also has the ability to actually do gallery and content. Again, a very similar layout to Microsoft Teams Rooms on Windows, allowing you that option to go through. And Michelle, if we go back to that gallery and content, we'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and so on this slide, very similar experience to Teams Rooms on Windows. You get the same setup, the same experience. We default to gallery. As soon as content's shared, the content takes over. Today, there's a question in chat about chat being forced on by default on Android. It is not today. I won't comment on plans for the future, but I would expect parity at some point. I'll just put it that way. But beyond that, this is toggleable also. So if you want as a IT admin that when content is shared, you default to just content instead of people plus content, that is changeable in the settings on the device itself. But the default experience is gallery, and then as soon as content is shared, you get gallery plus content.
And again, with a single screen, the dual 16 by 9, you've got your content specified on that display, allowing you, if you want multiple screens of that content to actually be there, you can DA that screen as well. The next layout that we have is, again, another one that's on Teams or on Windows as well. I hope that everybody is seeing the consistency that's going on with a lot of these. You know, again, understanding which ones are available, what's where, and how to actually do everything, you're going to see this. But Teams Rooms on Android, large gallery mode. Again, you're not going to see this option if it's a point-to-point or you've got 3 people inside of the meeting and you're allowing only those people inside of the meeting. There is a threshold that comes into play that allows this gallery to be populated in the settings.
Exactly. Yeah. But other than that, large gallery is the exact same across Windows and Android. Same experience, same video feed coming back to the endpoint. No real change there. If you've got a dual screen room, you can get large gallery and content side by side. And then together mode, exact same experience. Again, video coming back from Teams server side, single video feed coming back with everybody in it, all merged together, and you get the exact same experience on Android that you get on Windows.
Yeah, and I'm just replying to a chat is front row on Android on the roadmap. We don't even have to talk about roadmap. It's already there. That's what we're going through. And again, when we go through all of this, we've also had questions and everything like that. So we're going through it. So we don't expect that everybody understands all of this, but at the same point, we want to actually document everything that's available. And again, together mode, another important option on Teams Rooms on Android is together mode, because again, having that ability to do it, dual screen, and even putting people inside of that that executive boardroom, like you said, Matt, it's an important way that people can customize their layouts and their Teams Rooms on Android solutions.
Correct.
All right, so let's go ahead and move to the next slide, where we've got again a layout. Did not know it was there because it's not there unless you're sharing content. Focus on content is also available on Teams Rooms on Android. Again, giving you that same experience. Again, when people go to a room, they're not necessarily going to know, oh, this is Android or this is Windows. You as an administrator should understand where it is, how you set it, do everything. Now, you'll be able to set this as a default, again, inside of the Android settings. When content is shared, this will be the default stage for the layout. All right. And again, yeah, there is a question about how you get all these and everything else. Most of these, Matt, are available in Teams Room Pro, really showing the value of the Teams Room Pro license. We don't talk about, we made the conversation with licenses really, really easy. Basic is just that. You're not getting a lot with Basic, but you're getting the ability to actually try things. Anybody that wants these features, wants everything that Matt and I are talking about, you're looking at Teams Room Pro as your solution. So if we move on to the next slide, we're going to actually talk a little bit about how these layouts work in some of the archetypes and how some of them are being utilized even here at Microsoft as Customer Zero as well. Let's talk about the focus room, because what we've got here, we actually put out these archetypes, again, how we do it at Microsoft, but we give you that layout at the front of the room as a suggested side where you can see its gallery view, and then it's probably just a content only or focus on content view that you actually get inside of this focus room. Now, that doesn't mean that the other layouts won't work, but this is probably the best solution for this room, Matt.
Most likely, yeah. For a space this size and for a layout like this, front row works really well too for a room when you're sitting that close to the display. If you've got a 60-inch screen and you're only a couple feet away, front row works out really well. But otherwise, yeah, a gallery is the easy default option for everybody and what most folks would expect walking into that space from an end user perspective also.
Yeah, and you're going to want to actually look at the room, look at the furniture. Now, this wouldn't work if we were all bar height and the camera is above the screen and you're looking down and things like that. All of that needs to be considered. Gallery view is a great one for that kind of solution, but like you said, it can be front row as well if you've got the camera placed on the right side. And if we move on to
there's a question, by the way, in the Q&A on display size. So Matt, does size matter?
as big as physically possible in the space is always the answer, Michelle.
No,
Bigger is always
no.
better.
We actually follow Avixa standards, and there is a standard that actually has for display size inside of
There
rooms.
is.
It depends on how far away you are viewing that screen and how large you want to go. To be honest, Matt, I don't want a 110-inch screen if I'm 35 inches away from that screen.
What?
That becomes
Imagine watching tennis on that and how great it would be.
Imagine how many meetings wouldn't be going on if you're watching tennis in Teams room size. So that's what we want to do is we want to focus on the meeting. We want it to be comfortable. And actually, Avixa does have standards. Now, the question always comes into play. Should it be 4K? Should it be 1080p and things like that? We have started supporting 4K at the front of the room, but that's just for the layout. It doesn't mean that your cameras are in 4K and things like that. So that's another thing to sort of consider at the front of the room. But again, we want to make sure that you are following Avixa standards for the size of the room display.
Greg Jeffries is so happy with you now, Jimmy. He's in the chat as well. Gold star, Jimmy. Yeah.
Is he? All right, good.
Fine. Use the Avixa standards. I like that. That's probably the more appropriate answer. But just buy the big TV and put it on the wall.
You know, and it's funny because most of the focus rooms that we see, man, and this is an important distinction as well, it's single screen. We don't see a lot of dual screens inside of the focus rooms. And we don't see that because you really cover everything with that single screen. Again, with the layouts that you're going to look at a smaller room, 4, 5, 6 maybe people inside of that focus room. The single screen really does the best solution for that so that people on each side aren't straining to see the other screen. Again, when you're going into that, bigger does solve that better. And again, the Avixa standards will go for that. Now, the medium room is where we start to see some of those dual screens come in. Not all the time, but this goes towards what we were talking at the boot camp about a projector versus a dual screen and other things as well, being able to actually satisfy all of the people that sit inside of that room and sit inside of that room comfortably. Now, inside of this, you may see the large gallery view because we expect that if you've got that many people inside of the room, you're going to have that many people remote as well.
Yeah, I think there's some great scenarios and some great use cases when you've got a lot of remote participants and having the ability to have a full screen of content and then your remote participants on another screen, be it 9 participants, be it 49 participants or somewhere in between, totally useful in spaces like this. And that's where kind of making that decision of single screen versus dual screen comes into play. Also, do I want a full dedicated content monitor and a dedicated remote participant monitor? That way you're making use of those screens. Or do I really just want as big of a content screen as I can and the remote participants are less vital in that space? And there's a series of decisions that need to be made based on how you're designing for that room, or some of the Avixa standards come into play, or some of the ceiling height challenges come into play too. I've walked into some offices where you've only got 8-foot ceilings and you can't fit a really big single screen in there, and dual screen just makes more sense because of the vertical space. So it really comes down to the room design and what you're aiming for as an end user experience, as well as what physically fits in the room.
Yeah, and I see a lot of these things inside of the chat, the size of the TV and everything else. This is why we have partners, and this is why we look at partners for you to make some of these decisions inside of the room and make sure that you're going through it is because of that. So if we go to the next one, you're going to see the large room, which actually went from a dual screen to a widescreen projector, Matt. I mean, this is the way that we do a better large room here at Microsoft for Customer Zero. We can also have that Surface Hub actually on the wall as well, giving you that ability to actually engage with the digital whiteboard as well as having that speaker. And this is where spatial audio, this is where things really come into play. And again, that ability to do the front row with the background segmentation and things like that will give you a good experience. Even having the ability to do multiple cameras around the room. We know that's on the roadmap. We know that's actually a message center thing that's coming up with the ability to do all of this, automatically being able to choose all the best angles for the people inside of the room. But this is a great room as well. And this is actually a very popular room at Microsoft.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've continued to build more and more rooms like this over time with multiple cameras to fill those larger spaces. I just joined a meeting the other day where we were using a multi-camera setup in one of our physical rooms on campus. And it's a really good user experience. And we've had really great feedback on our side, too, to be able to make sure that everybody can see who's remote and who's saying what, where, when, and how.
Yeah, and the next archetype that we're actually going to talk about is signature Teams rooms. And it's labeled as portrait. Now, again, this is a smaller room, allowing that focus room to actually be a signature room. but allowing you actually to do it with a projector, allowing it to actually be a roaming Surface Hub that actually doesn't attach to the wall. Again, making sure even that you've got extra seating at the back that's at bar height. Front row works best inside of this room type. I would not put gallery inside of this room because, hey, it may not work as well as the front row does with the chat, with the two areas of interest on the side as well.
Yeah, and this room was actually built by Microsoft IT as a way to do a low cost upfit to a signature room, where the challenge was we had a lot of rooms that were in this experience where the display was on the short wall in the room. We already had a whiteboard on the long wall. The display was on the short wall. We had some new furniture that we were willing to invest in, but we didn't want to change all of the physical infrastructure in that space. And so that's where you see this room design come into play, where now we're putting the display and keeping it on the short wall, but putting a table in there that still builds towards that signature room design. And I'm sure in one of the next couple slides here, we'll show the next signature room design. There you go, where we shift that whole conversation and we put the TV on the long wall instead, and you're able to get a bigger display on the long wall. The whole conversation with that portrait room was, how do we do that in a more low cost way rather than having to redo all of the physical infrastructure in that space? If you're building net new, you can build the landscape one easy. If you want to refresh your space entirely, totally works, but there are options and ways to achieve that signature design without having to totally rip out everything that was already built in that conference room.
And that's the key, making sure that your space and the layout and everything is comfortable. So let's jump in a little bit to the setup of what we can do with all of these. Now, the first one that we're going to talk about with the setup is chat on and off by default. Now, in Teams rooms on Windows, this is set in the XML. And again, that chat pane that we're talking about is at the front of the room, and it's on and off by default. Now, there was conversation inside of the chat early on, Matt, about, I don't want to see chat. I don't want to have that up on the front of the screen. But I will tell you that not seeing chat and being inside of a room, you are missing out many times on a completely separate kind of meeting that happens inside of the chat. Even here, if we didn't have chat, we wouldn't know what everybody actually wants to hear about. Remember, we put these together using feedback from partners, but we don't always get 100% of the feedback. Some of the questions that people have asked here, we'll go back and we'll actually modify some of these slides and make sure that the documentation is correct for everybody that's been here. But understanding how you turn it on and off, and it is different from Windows than it is on Android. Again, an administration decision, but looks the same at the front of the room.
Exactly. Yeah, and all of this we do by feedback, and we turn things on by default because the majority of our customers today don't change any of the settings on their devices. They deploy them once and then let them take updates as they go. But we like to make those options and toggles available for customers that want to change what that experience looks like for their end users.
Yeah, and I think, there was a question that just came in. What's your vision on interactive displays as main displays? Do you see real added value? Well, there's a couple of different things. In the boot camp, we actually went over the different types of room systems there are. And one of those was board. And I do see value with a board and a console, Matt, a console that sits on the table. Why do I see value in that? Because again, you're rolling that board in. You may not even be attaching it to the wall. Then you're putting the console on the table. You've got the best of both worlds for a meeting for those small and medium rooms. Number one, you can have that sit down meeting, meaning that I come in, I hit the join button, and everybody's sitting down, and there's no interactive solution inside of that room. But what happens when I want a whiteboard? Those boards allow you to now walk up, and those interactive displays that we have with Teams rooms on Windows will allow you to walk up and whiteboard as well. Those are two different types of meetings that many times people will go, all right, I need to dictate this is the way that the room is going to work. It's either an interactive room or it's a sit down and meet room. But allowing those boards along with the console that sits on the table really gives you the best of both worlds.
100% agree.
Yeah.
Before we continue, I know we are at time, so if you have to leave, then feel free, of course, to go. Just want to let you know that if you've signed up to the September learning hour, you'll automatically be signed up to the October piece as well. We're going to be speaking on AOSP and MDAP next month. If you have to leave, please go. We have 3 more slides to cover, and then we'll wrap this one up. Jimmy, I think the next one is auto exiting the meeting.
Yeah, the chat and chat bubbles we went through and everything else, but allowing the system to actually auto exit the meeting. Now, this means, Matt, that the room is the last one inside of the meeting.
Exactly.
And it just needs to exit.
Yeah, there's a series of conditions that have to be met. The meeting time has to have ended. So say it was a 1 to 2 o'clock meeting and it's now 2:05 and the room is the only participant left in the meeting, it will automatically leave. This prevents those scenarios where everybody leaves a Teams meeting, but nobody hit the hang up button on the console ahead of time. Nobody wanted to walk up to the front of the room and tap it on an all-in-one board. Everybody just got up and left. Okay, cool. The room's just going to automatically leave. But if there's multiple participants still in the meeting, we don't automatically disconnect. That way, if your meeting runs long, we don't just hang up on you like we used to do in the VTC days.
Well, it's also good because look, we're at time. We're not going to exit this meeting. We got 3 more slides, Matt. We got to get to and everything else. But auto exit is an important setting to actually understand and enable on the Teams rooms on Windows devices, allowing the system to actually exit so that when people walk into the next room, again, they are presented with that easy to use console screen and not having to guess about where they are.
Yeah,
and the next slide
Windows
is
only?
actually,
it's on by default
only,
on both
correct.
platforms. You can turn it off on Windows. You cannot turn it off on Android.
Correct. And then participant controls. Again, this is on the console. You can make yourself really larger on the front of room display. You can hide yourself and do things. But again, Matt, we don't see a lot of people actually engaging in this kind of solution from the Teams room side. They're really doing this on the remote side and having that ability.
Correct.
Yeah. So participant controls are there. Now that is our last slide for this month. As Michel said, if you signed up for September, you will be getting an invite, and that invite is for Tuesday, October 1st. We're going to do it at the same time. It is the first Tuesday of every single month. We're going to take topics, and we're going to expand and go deep on them. We want everybody to chat inside of the chat. We want people to ask us questions, engage us on LinkedIn if we did not answer your question. But next month, we will be going over AOSP. And now, there's a lot of new acronyms, Matt. AOSP is not MDEP. There are different things that different things stand for. So understanding AOSP and what it engages, because again, everybody on Teams rooms on Android needs to understand this because there is a change coming, Matt.
Yes, there is a change coming. We talked about it last week in a webinar I did, and we'll talk about it again in October and make sure that everybody's aware of what that change is. And then the MDEP part is a whole other conversation around the actual operating system side. It'll be a fun conversation for everybody, and I'm looking forward to it.
I like that in chat. AOSP OMG.
Thanks so much,
Just
everyone,
putting that everywhere.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I think the chat will stay here, so if you have questions in the meantime, feel free to pop them in the chat. One thing that I love so much about this group is that it's a tight-knit community, so let's keep the conversation going. Thanks so much for joining our first Teams Rooms Learning Hour of the new fiscal year. We're looking forward to seeing you again in October.
Thanks everybody. See you in a month.